Hi, I'm Bill Doherty, and I will welcome the viewers to another edition of Bill's Bullpen. Bill's Bullpen is a program intended to give some of the people some idea of what programs are going on, what things that are happening in the region, and things that they might want to know a little bit more about. And with me today is Jim Potter. Jim Potter is on the Wastewater Protection Committee, right?
Fund, board.
Board. And you also represent the town at the...
Well, that's at that board.
At that board, okay. And what is your involvement with wastewater management programs locally?
So we've just undertaken the comprehensive wastewater management plan for Bourne. We brought on environmental partners who will be Bourne's consultant for really the next 2 to 3 years. While they work through this plan. It's really critical for the community to undertake this plan. We haven't done it on this scale before. There have been kind of smaller localized plans of study in Bourne, although most of them centered around just downtown Buzzards Bay.
Jim, 10 years ago, Buzzards Bay was considered to be an economic development desert because of the wastewater management issues that were involved. And I think a lot of people have heard that. But why do you have to have a comprehensive plan for the whole community?
So that's a great question, and there's a great answer to that. And so many years ago, there was an agreement called the 208 plan from all of the Cape towns with the state. And in the 208 plan, everyone said that they would pursue wastewater study, wastewater projects as they learned some more about them. And some communities did, and some didn't do a lot. And in Bourne's case, we had an existing connection to Wareham for downtown Buzzards Bay, so there wasn't a lot of new study other than expansion downtown Buzzards Bay. And then again, for the rest of the town, there really wasn't anything done under that 208 plan. And the state really wants this information on how towns are going to address the increased nitrogen in the bays, the estuaries, and then the inland bodies too, the ponds and the lakes. And so in our case, Bourne hadn't undertaken it, and we decided as a Board of Sewer Commissioners that we need to do something about that. And so there was that component. And then to kind of up the ante a little bit, the state added this short-term rental tax to all short-term rentals on Cape Cod. And then each community now, the state collects the tax, but it's kind of set aside with a number as to what each community contributed. And that's the board that I sit on, is this Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund board. And so now, not only do you have the 208 plan that says, you should be investigating and looking, now there's actually money being set aside for reimbursement purposes for you to actually undertake these projects. So there really isn't an excuse not to look into the methods and the means of how do you best address wastewater in the community. So the new plant that's being built downtown isn't part of the plan that we're undertaking now, but it will become part of the overall plan. So that process started before we undertook this plan that we're doing now. It'll take into account the new plant, our existing agreement with Wareham, and all the other areas of town. It'll discuss a little bit about any other regional partnerships that might be out there, including Joint Base Cape Cod, And then it also investigates alternative systems than just, your sewer treatment plants. There are some other alternative treatment systems, such as shellfish, cranberry bogs, things of that nature, although they always require a secondary system that is more robust at treating. For instance, you can't have a hurricane come in and wash out your sewer treatment, plant if you were using shellfish beds in that scenario. So you always have to have some other alternative to the alternative system.
Well, when you mention alternative systems, that we've known about Clevis multrums and things like that, where you had waterless systems, to address some of these things. Is it part of the plan to actually permit some of these alternate systems for individual use as part of this plan?
Well, the plan will take into account all the areas of town,
Mm-hmm.
and what's the best solution. And not everyone's equal. Some areas maybe will have higher nitrogen concentrations than other areas. A lot of times it's your zoning. If you have an area that's densely packed, usually you have a difficult time removing the nitrogen because you have that density, and it might only take a few failed systems in that proximity to all of a sudden you realize that there's a lot more nitrogen that's in that local area. Whereas if you might have a different zoning where you could have several acres of houses that are spaced out, and you never really see that nitrogen increase because there's that much more land that it kind of filters through. And it's not to say you don't have a problem, but it's to say that it's kind of masked a little bit better.
How are we measuring nitrogen loading now?
Well, we don't measure it ourselves, but the Buzzards Bay Coalition does measure nitrogen in some of our bays.
In the bays?
And they've been doing that for several
Okay.
years.
One of the things that you notice is that beaches that abut some of these bays do not have vegetation on them.
Mhm.
Vegetation has been identified as a means of, let's say, of mitigating or moderating the effect of nitrogen loading. Is there anything underway to, let's say, to prevent residential homeowners and commercial entities from, let's say, stripping vegetation away in order to, let's say, to permit more nitrogen to come into the our bodies of water?
No, there's not anything like that. And also, you do get to a point where you can start to discuss beyond septic systems. Not, I don't think anywhere in this area, but sometimes there's discussions other places of fertilizers. That can cause a lot of nitrogen into the ground as well. And it becomes more of a kind of a Board of Health issue with, now are going to control, how much fertilizer somebody puts on their lawn type thing.
I think that one of the problems that we found, in the past was that people were looking at fertilizer on the basis of more is better and not following the directions on the packages, whereas commercial applicators, licensed commercial applicators, recognized that their profit margins were based upon just using the minimum necessary in order to maintain it. There have been some schemes in the past which were kind of interesting, but where they wanted to use goats, for example, to manage the vegetation along the transmission lines, but didn't tell people that they'd have to put pigs in first to root out all of the, the root systems that were underneath. So, there's that. So, what have been some of the concerns that people have expressed with regard to, the wastewater management planning that's been going on so far?
Well, I don't think that they've had concerns about the planning so far, and so I like to make that distinction because the plan's just kind of, the comprehensive plan is just underway, and the public will have plenty of opportunity to engage in that process.
Okay,
When
let's
Environmental Partners has public, there'll be plenty of public forums that people can engage in.
That's something that's very important. It touches my heart, because all the time I was on the Cape Cod Commission, it would seem like we would have 12 meetings attended by about, maybe a dozen people at each one of the meetings. And then it would go in the paper that it's imminently, we're going to start this
Mhm.
program. And all of a sudden we'd hear, but you never talked to me.
Right.
So the question is, how can you effectively reach out to all of the people, not only the ones that are concerned, but all of the citizens who at the end of the day are going to be given a bill for what the state does not pick up? And believe me, when we looked at
Right.
wastewater problems in the past, we were talking about not millions, but billions. I think it was like $7 billion, I think was one of the things that was a lowball price on these things. Do you have some sense of what kinds of dollars we're talking about in order to implement, to complete this planning?
Well, to complete, the plan is an expensive plan that we're paying the consultant. And so it's probably the most expensive plan that Bourne's ever undertaken in terms of, a paid study to a consultant. But you have to spend a lot to get that comprehensive plan. So they're looking at the whole town.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they come up with is a product of their own expertise and public feedback as to what's best. So I wouldn't pretend to say that there's some ballpark number that we can look at. The only thing I could say is when you get into treatment plants, you're usually in the tens of millions of dollars
At least.
for treatment plants.
However, there have been some success stories. The high school that I went to was actually built on a piece of property that was contiguous to the Boston water treatment plant off of Morrissey Boulevard in Dorchester. That was shut down, and right now UMass Boston and the Kennedy Library sit on that site. So there is a recovery process that's there. There was some concern about the plant that was built in Deer Island out of Boston, where people were concerned not only about primary but also secondary, and then they agreed that they needed tertiary. In other words, a 3 times safety
Right.
factor that was involved. And in the town of Bourne, we're separated by a canal.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of people have expressed a concern about, although dilution is the solution in a lot of problems as far as getting rid of septic waste and stormwater drains and things like that, is
Yeah.
where does it go? Is there any thoughts about those kinds of issues?
Yeah, well, we've already heard from a lot of people on that.
Mhm.
As a sewer board, we've held quite a few meetings about something about this topic. We've either had the Buzzards Bay Coalition in to talk about their regional project that they're proposing, that they received a state grant for, or
Tell the folks what that regional project is.
So that regional project, it predates me by a couple years,
Mhm.
and they were given a grant and then a second grant to undertake a study about a regional project that would include Bourne, South Plymouth, just the area around Buttermilk Bay, Mass Maritime Academy, Wareham, and potentially Marion. So Marion's in the discussion, but may not be part of the project ultimately.
Well, it's all the way on the other side of the Weeantic River and
Yeah, they have
Stone
their own
Estate and all of
treatment
that.
plant, and so it's a question of if they can do something with their own treatment plant
Mhm.
as opposed to have to tie into a bigger plant at Wareham type
Mhm.
thing. So that study looked at moving the outfall pipe from the Agawam River down to the canal. And that's been the study. And kind of since that time, we've heard from a lot of local residents in Bourne that say, well, we don't think that that's the ideal spot. And that could be true. But what we don't know is ultimately what the gallonage is that would be coming out of that pipe. When they first started the study, and then where it is now, I think they're around a third of the size of flow from when they started. So there is that. There's that component, and then there's another component to it that I've always tried to express to the residents and that live here, that we have a say about all of that. There was concern that there was this kind of project that's being talked about, and it is talked about, but it needs buy-in from all those municipal players. There's no project unless there's agreement to have a project.
We'd like to think so.
Yeah, well, there isn't. And so, Wareham doesn't need a plant that is way bigger than they need. The only idea was that because there's an existing plant there, it would be easy, and they have space, there would be opportunity to increase the size of the plant there. But to do so, the Agawam River can't handle the additional flow. So they had to find a different location. And there still could be other locations, but under the study that they were given the grant for, their idea, the Buzzards Bay Coalition's idea was this is, at the existing Mass Maritime outfall. So there is an existing, outfall there, but it's very small in comparison to what we're talking about for a regional solution. But there's no official buy-in from any of the communities, only agreement to discuss. So no one signed a memorandum of understanding that we're moving forward on this project. That's not what this is. And in fact, the Buzzards Bay Coalition, they don't really have a project without municipal buy-in, because they're just a nonprofit entity. They don't have authority to do anything. The plant's in Wareham.
And nobody elected them.
Right, and all the municipal leaders have a say as to whether they engage their town in that discussion. And Buzzards Bay, they know that, but I think there was some worry and concern amongst people that maybe there was something building here that isn't probably the reality. It's definitely a solid study and concept, and they do have data. And then the question just becomes, is it for Bourne? Do we need to have that be part of that regional discussion? Well, we do need to be part of the regional discussion. Because it's still a solution. We have, as we undertake this comprehensive plan, environmental partners, they're going to look at even still that side of the community that's not sewered, and we have to make decisions at some point if we need to sewer it or not, and then the study is going to tell us that. But if we do, we don't have capacity to really do that locally, all of that. So we would need another solution. So we have to stay engaged in the idea, because it is a solution.
Okay. Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is there's two significant federal entities that are involved. Corps of Engineers has a responsibility for the canal, and they certainly, my experience with the Corps is that if once they get scratched, they really will, you'll hear from them. The other thing is that Joint Base Cape Cod, has significant populations increases at different times of the year, because I think they still support reserve and National Guard training, which means you have an increase. The other thing that that's coming up in terms of attacks on on wastewater programs are that the year-round population of Bourne is about 21,000. During the 16 weeks of summer, it becomes about 40,000. So there's that,
Yeah.
that escalation,
Right.
In there. And then, there's a question about, as we put a burden on the community to support the payment for all of this, there's a question about how is that all spread around, regardless of the importance of clean water, because it affects everything that's important, our health, our safety, our welfare, and also the tourist dollars, that come into the community.
Right.
How do we win the hearts and minds of people to get behind this program? What has developed out of your initial, looking into this?
Well, I mean, you have a lot there, and so if we go back a little bit and we look at, we know we have a plan that the state wants us to follow and explore. We've hired a consultant. We're looking at that plan. We don't know ultimately what comes out of that plan at the end. It could be you need a treatment plant on the south side of the canal. It could be you don't need a treatment plant on the south side of the canal. You need to tie into an expanded plant at Joint Base Cape Cod. So we won't know that end result. But I've had experience with this. I've done 3 projects, sewer projects in Wareham, and a lot of it's the same type of seasonal community. And essentially, when a neighborhood is sewered, it doesn't matter if it's seasonal or year-round. Everybody is given the betterment, and everyone shares in that cost. And so,
I remember in Rockland when they put in the sewer just before I sold the house, and I had a corner lot, and I had to pay frontage.
oh
on the
yeah,
whole
there's
corner.
different methods. There
Yeah,
are different
yeah.
methods to that. That's one method. Another method is just sharing it equally amongst how many people are in the project and dividing it equally, and it doesn't matter, how much frontage you have.
I can hardly wait to the town meeting where this gets talked about.
So, but that brings up the other part. And so the other part right now is we're not set up for that. We're not set up. We have an enterprise fund that just handles 1,069 users in Buzzards Bay. And that system has worked for the 30 years, that we've had it. And but for almost all of that time, sewer was sort of out of sight, out of mind. It got sent to Wareham. We don't worry about it here. It sends to Wareham. And so it's not a big enterprise fund. It doesn't have a lot of savings for capital improvement. And it wasn't at the forefront. And so now as we talk about the entire town, over time here, it's not tomorrow, but we have to talk about, does the enterprise fund go away and then it becomes more of a town shared cost to improving the waters for everyone? Falmouth just recently did this. And so they've shared their costs now amongst everyone because the thought process is you're improving the water for everyone, so everyone shares in that. And so we just have to see what, at the end of this plan, what that looks like in Bourne. I'm sure everyone will agree that we all share the waterways.
For example, if you identify what a commercial center is in Bourne, and the contribution that an adequate wastewater management plan makes to that, can you make a case, in your opinion, that the economic strength and improvement in that part of the community would justify the whole community supporting it for, let's say, the commercial center by itself?
Well, usually, excuse me, when you add the infrastructure, that's what a lot of commercial entity is looking for.
Mhm.
And so the reason that downtown Buzzards Bay has been able to be rejuvenated, it's from many things, but the increased sewer capacity is part of that. There were several businesses that just wanted to come to town and connect to sewer,
Mhm.
and so they did. And so in some cases, you can bring opportunity to town that you didn't have before because you have that infrastructure. It doesn't hold. It's not a guarantee that you'll always bring some type of big business to town or something like that. Sometimes the town doesn't want that. So you kind of have to go hand in hand with it. It is an economic opportunity,
Mhm.
but it's also an environmental opportunity to protect our environment. So
Well, I think that the Cape Cod Commission used to emphasize the fact that economic development that did not have a balance of environmental protection was not good, for the community, not good for Cape Cod, and certainly not good, for Bourne. We're almost at the end of this, believe it or not. So at this point, I would ask you, Jim, as a proponent of this, what kind of takeaway would you want people to have from your point of view with regard to this particular issue?
Well, I think it's important that, I'm not an expert in wastewater, but I've had familiarity with it,
Mhm.
and I've been able to do a few projects with it. And then here, serving as chair of the sewer commissioners, we've dealt with it for the 3 years that I've been here. It's important that we always balance the cost with the environment. But we have to understand that how we did things with septic systems do not treat for nitrogen. They just store. And a lot of times what people forget is you pump out that septic system, and where does that go? It goes to a treatment plant to be processed. So you don't ever really get away from treatment plants. You can have it out of sight, out of mind, but you don't remove it from the solution. And so part of what we have to look at as a community is what are the solutions for Bourne if septic isn't the solution. And septic, again, just doesn't treat for nitrogen. And it's
You're forgetting phosphorus.
And it does not treat for phosphorus. And phosphorus is also treated at the plant,
Mhm.
and the levels are looked at a little differently than nitrogen, but it is that secondary component that you mentioned that you want to treat for.
Mhm.
And so you're still treating for everyone's
Mhm.
septage at a treatment plant,
Okay.
and you're improving the nitrogen in that area.
Okay. Well, so there's a lot to do.
There's a lot to
There's
do.
a lot that's been done. So, as a final thing, how can people find out more about it and get involved in giving you oversight?
So, as a sewer commission, we meet at least once a month. They can always talk to us
Mhm.
by email or the phone, or contact us through the town website. The town website will have a web page just dedicated to the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
And there'll be plenty of notice to the community about all the upcoming public forums with environmental partners. And I
Mhm.
also talked to our board about just having a standing agenda item at every meeting that people can come and talk about the sewer or sewer issues or
Okay.
any of those solutions.
Well, folks, you've heard it. There's an opportunity for you to participate. And remember, if you don't participate, you can't say that or complain as to what the outcome is. Citizen involvement is very important, and this is probably one of the more important things that you should pay attention to here in Bourne. So with that, I want to thank my guest, Jim Potter, who was chair of the Sewer Commission, as well as a member of the Board of Selectmen. And I want to thank the viewers for taking the time to watch this production of Bill's Bullpen at Bourne TV.